Let us start the second part of this course from some ontological foundations. What we see, that is, our observations, is only part of what occurs, that is, events or manifestation of change, which are in turn caused by some running process, underlying mechanism that explains why events occur. If I let go this stone, it will fall down. This is an event, and if you're nearby me, you will see this happening, an observation. But all of this happens because there is gravity, a mechanism. The world of mechanisms is where systems supposedly are, but we do not have direct access to the world of mechanisms, only to those of the observations, through which we form, confirm, disconfirm to be in front of systems. Now, human organizations, communities, and societies can intuitively also be seen as systems of interacting components. However, to complete a systematic determination, we need to describe of what structure and behavior we are referring to. Structure and behavior form a coupling that can be found in different branches of knowledge. Structure is something relatively and adequately stable and context-free. Behavior is in contrast something contingent, highly depending on the environment. Structure attempts to modify behavior, but behavior determines eventually how structure evolves. Other applications of this dichotomy are, for instance, the difference between genotype and phenotype at the base of evolution, but also the difference between grammar and speech. Grammar influences how we speak, but if we do all speak differently, then plausibly one day the grammar will change too. What would be then the behavioral components of a social system? What would be its structure? There exist several ways to approach these questions. Intuitively, the fundamental interacting entities that form a social system are agents, that is, social actors as individuals or organizations. However, at second sight, we observe that communications play perhaps an even greater role in social activities. Luhmann proposed to consider communication as the atomic component of social systems, not people. Most communications trigger other communications in response, both in case of acceptance or rejection. Following the production and reproduction of messages can perhaps say more of the social system than the individuals producing those. Not surprisingly, social media analysis is essentially founded on this intuition. For the scope of this course, however, we will stay at the level of agents, although we will perform, even in this case, some abstraction. And for the social structure, in order to be understood, social signals have necessarily to be placed in a certain institutional context, at the very minimum, a certain linguistic context. In order to communicate, we need to know that this word, in most cases, counts as this object. Then, because institutions contain machinery functional to create shared meaning, constitutive rules, status functions, etc., they are fundamental part of the structure of social systems. However, looked in terms of mechanisms, it is also clear that institutions are not physical laws. Whereas the law of gravity does not change, institutions and their rules do change, both by legislative action, this primarily concerns formal institutions and follows a top-down direction, or by social change. This primarily concerns informal institutions and follows a bottom-up dynamics. Second, institutions are not real objects, nor mechanisms that exist out there without the people. They depend on similar representations in all people to be correctly functioning. There is no biological difference between Homo sapiens sapiens that lived in the Neolithical age and us today. The difference lies only in the cultural heritage and conceptual embedding in which we are educated since our birth. This also means that our world is particularly fragile if the continuity of across the generation is interrupted. History has shown that in several occasions. Institutions are not physical laws, also from another point of view. Physical laws can only be modeled. We don't have a direct access to them. Rules can be written, and so they can be accessible. However, their actualization can be different, as it depends on interpretation. For instance, we do not have any direct way to know what a sun symbol found in a certain document meant for ancient Egyptians. It could be the real sun, it could be a god, it could be a pharaoh, it could be a season, we don't know. We cannot be certain. Nevertheless, we still continue to interpret human behavior, updating our schemes of interpretation by direct and indirect learning. We learn continuously by observing, communicating, and acting in the world. Say that, we can pass on talking about agency. Agent comes from the Latin verb agere, meaning to act. Here, agents are entities which perform actions in order to achieve certain goals, not the teleological characterization. In contrast, objects do not act, they just react. Traditionally, four general characteristics are associated to agents. First, they proactively engage in the world in order to achieve their goals. Second, they are autonomous. That is, they are able to change their commitments if these may serve to better serve their goals. Third, they have some social ability. They need to be able to communicate in order to effectively interact with other agents. Fourth, they are reactive. That is, they may respond almost instantaneously to perceptual change. As humans, we tend to qualify as agents not only people, but also groups, organizations, countries, and eventually even other entities. In several religions, great manifestations of natures are usually associated with divinity. This picture is an example of a cargo cult. When Aborigines saw the first airplanes, they thought they were gods, and they started building up statues and performing rites to attract their benevolence. The internal decision-making mechanism of agents is generally modeled using the BDI template. This means that behavior is explained in terms of beliefs, what the agent thinks it is true; desires, what the agent would like to be true; intentions, what the agent is committed to make true. The three categories correspond respectively to the informational level, the preferential or volitional level, and the deliberative level. Remember from one of the previous classes. Each action is driven by an intent, but certain outcomes may be just side effects. We generally don't go to the dentist to feel pain. How agents deal with institutions. In another class, we observed that the regulative rules go somehow from the institutional layer to the problem-solving cycle of the agent. We can identify different types of interactions between agents. The agent may ask, "Can I do something?" This "can" has two meanings. The first meaning is, "Am I enabled to do something?" Here the agent checks whether it has the institutional power to select that action. For instance, have I the power to buy this house? The second meaning is, am I allowed to do something? As for instance, am I allowed to smoke? In this case, the agent checks whether permission was explicitly granted, strong permission, or whether there is no prohibition, weak permission. The second interaction is, I must do something, as I must record this video before tomorrow. In this case, the agent acknowledges a directive to perform a certain action. Note that the duty may stay in place even after its timeout. The third interaction is, I must not do something, as I must not drive on the left lane. This is typically triggered when the wrong behavior has been already selected and the agent attempts to provide remedy, for instance, escaping the prohibition, in this case, returning to the right lane. But why agents should follow what rules say? Two attitudes of agents towards norms have been identified. Under a deontic view, a norm is followed just because of the very existence of the norm. Under a consequentialistic view, a norm is followed only after an analysis of the possible outcome resulting from being complying or not complying with it. This attitude is particularly sensible to carrots and sticks. Which attitude represents human more? This is a question as old as history. However, Heiner's theory should have provided you with some hints on when humans prefer to follow given rules or when they attempt to optimize, even against those rules.